Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I am super excited to welcome you to the show today and our next podcast guest. And today it's Cassandra Bodzak. Hey Cassandra, how are you today?
Hi, good. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's my pleasure. We started the podcast recording today at 11:11, which I love because I think we're going to talk about a lot of spiritual things today. But before we jump into all of these different things, I would love to hear from you where you are currently located and what time it is in your time zone. I don't know if it's actually 11:11 there too, and what you've been up to this morning.
Yeah, it is 11:11 here too. I'm in Newport Beach, California. And and so this morning, this is like my first work item that I've been doing. I woke up, I do my meditation practice, I did some tapping. I do a little gratitude recording that me and my best friend send each other. And then I took a walk with my dog and we went and I got a coffee and then I came back and got ready to be on the podcast.
Nice. Very nice. Wow, what a beautiful, relaxing morning. I love that. It's really interesting. I hear more and more people talk about tapping. Can you tell us a little bit more about that really quickly? Like maybe when you started that and what it does for you?
Yeah, tapping is also called emotional freedom technique. So essentially you're tapping on these different energetic meridians while repeating certain phrases that help you reprogram your neural pathways and help you shift out of your reactions to things. So there's a couple different ways to tap. I found tapping years ago, probably, I don't know, 8 years ago, 7 years, a while ago. And so you can tap on anything and you can tap either. So the tapping that I usually do in the morning is positive installation. So it's kind of like affirming all of the things where you can be honest about, let's say you have a big goal that you're working towards right now. And you can be like, I'm like, not sure I'm going to hit the goal or whatever it is, right? You can kind of start from wherever your vibration is in that moment. And then you work yourself up to the point where you're like, I know I'm going to get it. Like I'm in alignment to it. And like, you kind of talk yourself into that higher vibration. And then there's also tapping if you are in like a funkier place, right? If you are in a funkier place where you're like feeling really blocked or really overwhelmed or anxious or whatever it is, you can start tapping on it. And you start with saying, even though I'm feeling super anxious right now, I still love and accept myself. Even though I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, I still love and accept myself, as you're tapping. And what it's doing is, as you're saying these things and you're tapping on these different energetic meridians, it's calming your nervous system, right? And it's essentially, it's giving you that like, I call like that miracle moment to kind of rewire your thoughts and to get out of that state of whether it's feeling triggered and shifting to that space of more peace where you have that deeper knowing of like, it's fine. I'm going to get everything done. Like, I'll handle it. Nobody's going to die if I don't answer an email on time or whatever, right? You kind of come back home to your sanity. Or for the opposite, it helps you get those affirmation, those thoughts that you want to think, the high frequency that you want to be on. It gets it to a place where it feels actually authentic in your body, which is why I like it. And I have not always been a really big fan of affirmations, because I think affirmations, if your frequency and your vibration is not aligned with what you're saying, you can say you're a millionaire till like you're blue in the face. But if every cell in your body is like, but we are so not a millionaire, then it doesn't matter how many times you say it. And so the magic of tapping is that as you're saying these things, it's actually helping your energy align to that feeling true.
Very cool.
Thank you so much for explaining that. I think it's really, I think it's super interesting. And I like to work with affirmations as well. And I think it really resonates with me when you say sometimes it's not aligned with how you actually feel. And then you can say it as much as you want, and it doesn't really resonate with you as much as it should, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, if we're not, I have a bunch of free tapping videos. If anybody that's listening wants to check it out, I have a bunch of free tapping videos on my YouTube. Cause I just love it. But yeah, cause that's the same thing. It's like with affirmations or, you know, speaking positive things. It's like, our words are very powerful. Our words are wands. I definitely believe that. But also, if there's like the discordance of you saying something and you not believing it, like I could tell you the sky is purple, like the sky is purple today, the sky is purple today, right? But like my unconscious knows that the sky is not purple today, like right now, the sky is blue, right? And so me saying it, every time I'm saying it, what I'm actually doing is reminding myself that it's not true.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Cassandra, tell us more about you and what you do and how you come to do what you do today.
Yeah, so I am a spiritual mentor and author. I have 3 books, a 4th one coming out in January. My first book was Eat with Intention, all about loving your body, connecting to your body's wisdom, and it has plant-based recipes and meditations for each recipe. And then my second book is Manifesting Through Meditation. And really has 100 different meditations that really help you anchor in the different aspects of manifesting the life that you want into reality. And then I also have a guided journal for spiritual awakening that came out in May. So that's just different guided questions to help you uncover the truth of who you are, get to know your authentic self, go through some of your blocks, you know, kind of move through that unpeeling and unfolding journey of the spiritual awakening. And I also have, I have a podcast called Divine Downloads. I have a master class that's called Divinely Design Your Life. So I've worked with women all over the world, and I pretty much I help them manifest the life that they dream of. And doing that, a big process of that is helping them get clear on what they desire, and then helping them remove any of the fears, blocks, limiting beliefs that are in the way, and embody that new reality and take the necessary aligned actions towards it. So that's what I do. And I started it when I was 21. It started with me being on my own journey. I had my own spiritual awakening, and it came through having some health issues with my body, and, you know, having no external answers, and no one, you know, going through all these tests and seeing all these doctors and no one really figuring out what was wrong with me. And the only thing that really helped me get back on track was me finally having a connection to my higher power, me tuning into my own intuition and taking those aligned actions was able to get me back on the path to health. And so that's kind of where this connection to our intuition and to our higher power began. And I had a blog kind of just talking about that journey and talking about the healthy food I was eating and all of that. And that's kind of how it gave way to my first book. And I actually was on a TV show for my healthy cooking called The Taste, which was on ABC with Anthony Bourdain. And so that was a big part. And then when I was teaching about cooking, what kept on coming up for me was there's so much more to it than just the food. And my spiritual practice was already so deep at that point. I was meditating all the time. I had gotten, you know, a couple different meditation certifications just for my own experience. And I was just so deep into this manifesting work and seeing it like play out in my life in these really incredible ways of the things that I was calling in, that I was like, this is what I want to teach women. This is what I want to show people what's possible. Because I have had so many of those moments in my life where I was just like, oh my God, like I can't believe it gets to be this good. And I can't believe it gets to flow this way. And, you know, I didn't like come from money or come from connections. My parents are, you know, my mom didn't work. My dad, you know, worked at an office job. Like I don't come from anything that like anybody that's like of this world or has any idea about like, you know, the kind of work I do or the business I have. And I really created it all from the ground up just by following my intuition. And so that's what now I love to teach other people how to do, and whatever that is for them. They don't all have to be creating businesses like mine, but whatever that path is for them forward, that's connected to their soul's highest good.
Amazing. And what did you, so you said it started kind of when you were 21 years old. And what were you like, I'm sorry, planning to do in terms of like profession? Did you like study, or did you, have a job and then kind of you had that breakthrough of you want to kind of more align with what is calling you?
So I was actually an actress. I went to school for, got a BFA in acting, was in a conservatory program at UConn for acting, and was also acting in like commercials and TV shows and independent films in New York City. And I had kind of gotten into that from high school, and then was doing that in the city afterwards. Living on the Upper East Side, and I would have like odd jobs, like as actors do. So I waited tables and, was like an assistant for someone, and just had a bunch of random jobs to pay the bills while I was auditioning and doing like small roles here and there. So yeah, so that's kind of what was going on when, but it was pretty crazy for me because I always had such a strong desire to be an actress. And so it was really interesting for me when I found something that I was equally passionate about. Because I don't know, and then I think what the blog and everything became for me was a creative outlet. It was a creative outlet where I didn't expect anybody to actually like read it or follow it or anything like that. But it made me feel like I was creating something. When, as an actress, you don't always have, you're kind of at the mercy of sometimes other people to allow you to be in their projects. So it gave me that outlet.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool. And so first of all, one last question about all of that is, what is your fourth book about that's coming out in January?
It's 365 days of happiness. And so it's kind of like, if you ever heard of A Course in Miracles, it has a 365-day workbook that helps you shift from fear to love and shift your brain. So this is like a more, I would say, like everybody accessible version of that, where every day there's a little contemplation and a little happiness practice, sometimes a meditation, sometimes a journaling thing, sometimes like a fun activity or whatnot, that helps you realign your brain with love, joy, abundance, possibilities, happiness, so that you're making those shifts out of the default setting that we have here that's like stressed, disgruntled, into that space of feeling happier, because I think that's the key to manifesting everything.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I want to talk with you about today, because one of the things that really resonated with me, and I know it will resonate a lot with the listeners as well, is about how to clear fears and how to let go of fears. Because I think sometimes we have these ideas or we have these desires for ourselves that we would like to bring into our lives, but something is holding us back, right? Something is keeping us, and it's oftentimes, kind of rooted maybe in our childhood or the things that we've been seeing, as we were growing up. So I was really curious to learn a little bit more about how you approach going through that process.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different layers to it. And I think the first most important thing is you have to be really willing to give it up. And a lot of people say that they are, but they're not. If you're arguing for your limitations, if you're arguing for your fear, if you're defending your fear, you're not ready to give it up. Right. And so I think the first step is to look at, what do you gain from this fear? Right. Sometimes we gain, connection from other people because we can, commiserate about having this fear. Sometimes we gain safety of not having actually put ourselves out there or really go for it. If you never really go for it, then you can't really fail. So I think the first step is to, when you look at your fears that you have, and if you don't know what fears you have, then the way to find out what fears you have, or find out what fears are kind of, I would say, on the chopping block at the moment, is get clear on something that you really want to happen in your life right now, something that you've been wanting to manifest, whatever that next level is for you. Write it down, whatever it is, if it's I have $1 million, or I have an amazing relationship, or I move across the country, whatever it is. And then write down immediately after it all of the noise that's in your head. So as soon as you claim the thing that you really want, what you will hear immediately after that is all of your reasons why you can't have it, right? Oh, I don't have enough money. Oh, nobody in my family's done this before. Oh, what if I fail? Oh, I don't have enough time. Oh, I'm not smart enough. Oh, I didn't get whatever. You got to be really honest with yourself and just write all of that stuff down so that you can see it. So that you can look, even if you're oh, this is silly, if it's coming up for you on some level, you believe it, right? And so you write it down, you look at it in the light of day. And then I would go through and just do what I just said. Look at those things and see, do I have any reasons for keeping some of these? And this takes again, being really honest with yourself, being what is my reason for keeping this? Is it because that's also going to be important for us to get rid of too. And then once you look at that, I think the bare minimum of what you can do is go through one by one and ask yourself, is this true? Do I know without a doubt? Do I know, if I put it in front of a jury, could they convict me of this? Right. And eliminate those. The ones that you're no, actually, it's not true, right? I literally made up a thing that is not even true, right? And so get rid of those ones, and then ask yourself for those ones, okay, well, what is the truth, or what would I like to be the truth? So if you have a thing that says I don't have enough time, and you're is it true? And you're yeah, it feels true. And you're but is it true? Could I be convicted of that in front of the Supreme Court? No. It is not true. I actually have the same amount of time that everybody else does, and I could prioritize it differently if I really wanted to. So it's not true. What do I want to believe? That I can make time matter to me, right? And so that's at the very base level of reorganizing those fears. And when you go through that, then what I have my clients do a lot of the times is make a notes in their phone. So they have a notes of kind of what their fears are and what their replacement statements are, so that as they go through the day, and eventually they just get it in their head, but as they go through the day, if that fear comes up, going through and reminding themselves, okay, actually the truth is that I have enough time and I need to prioritize the things I love, or whatever, right? So that they're reprogramming that brain on that level. The next level of it would be doing tapping, right? Would be going through those fears and saying, even though I feel I don't have enough time to make this happen, I still love and accept myself. Some days it really feels like my schedule is not my own. And then just going through and allowing themselves, as they're tapping, to say all of the things that come to their mind, right? All of the because we've built up quite an evidence case file when it comes to our fears. We've said, okay, well, remember that Monday where you really wanted to do that, but then your boss asked you to do that. We've created all of this evidence as to why our fears are real. So we have to go, tapping can also help you move through that, and then help you get back. And then you can even use that reordered statement in tapping, right? So you can go through and say all kind of like vomit out all of the fears around like not enough time, for example. And then after you've gotten it all out and you have no more vomiting to do on the fear, then you can say, okay, but the truth is I know that I have enough time and I can prioritize the things I want to do. In fact, I really want to get whatever it is done. So I'm going to make an hour for it. In fact, you know what? I could get up a little earlier, right? And then you start transitioning into the solution for it. So that I think is another practice that you can be really diligent about. Though that is something that I think it's easy for everyone to do at home on a regular basis. If you're serious about manifesting something, then you have to be serious about getting rid of everything that's in the way of it. Right. And so that is something that the reason that I think, sometimes me or like clients I work with are more effective at it than like the average bear is simply because of the commitment and the diligence. Right. Because if you've spent whatever 30 something years of your life, 40 something, 50, whatever old you are, right, years of your life, building up this fear, you're not going to turn it around in a 5-minute thing, right? There are some that you'll be able to pluck out, but the more you make a practice of it, the more that all of a sudden you start doing that for a week, all of a sudden, like beginning of week 2, it's already significantly less powerful. And it'll vary. There'll be some things that you can get rid of, in a few sessions. And there are some things that will take a little bit longer. And then, there's other clearing techniques that I teach in my programs. And there's, when you talk about childhood wounds and stuff, that is work that I do one-on-one. That is work that I think you should go to a skilled practitioner and help. What I do is a version of EMDR. I call it the butterfly technique. And so I will lead my client back in a session through the link of memories they have associated to that fear. So we'll say, okay, when did that fear of not being good enough start? What's the earliest memory? What's the most recent memory? What's the memory after that, right? And so you'll have this kind of lineage of memories that have compounded that fear. And the earliest one will probably be, around 3 years old, right? Between like 1 and 5 is usually the earliest that those things happen. And then we start at 1 to 5. And then what we do is I do butterfly, but you can also go to an EMDR practitioner and they'll do eye movement, or everyone has kind of their different ways to work with it. But then what you do is you get what is the memory? How did it make you feel? Bring it back up. And that's why it's important to work with someone on it, because you're dealing with memories that can be intense. And so you need to be with someone that's going to know how to maneuver you through it. And it's not something that I think if you want to work on it by yourself, then the best thing for that would be going into a meditation and talking to your inner child at that age and reminding them that they're loved and reminding them of the truth, and they're comforting them. I have a meditation like that in one of my programs as well. That is an easier way to do that in a loving way and to kind of remind them that that's not true. But yeah, if you work with a practitioner, then what you essentially will do is you reprocess it, because what happens is when we have those like baby trauma things that happen, and it could be a really mundane incident. If you have like real trauma, like big trauma, you absolutely need to work with someone one-on-one. You should not be going into that by yourself, because you don't want to re-traumatize yourself. And but even with little t trauma, it could be like, you got to be in school. And so your dad didn't let you have ice cream that day. And you made it seem that unless you're perfect, you're not good enough, right? You can't treat yourself. And so you made this whole big story over like your dad just trying to like encourage you to get good grades or whatever, right? Because our little fragile brains, don't have the processing power that our adult brains do, right? We walk down the street and you could have a homeless person scream at you, "You're ugly," right? And it doesn't affect us mentally. Maybe it jars us a little bit if they scream at us, but it's not like because your brain now knows how to file it. Your brain just files that under like, oh, he's mentally unstable, doesn't really know what he's saying. Like, you're not ingesting that, right? When you're under like 13 years old, you ingest a lot. Right. So a lot of times people don't even know what you're making the meaning out of what they're doing, and you make meaning. And those are a lot of our biggest limiting beliefs that happen in adulthood. So when that happens, you have an unprocessed thought that kind of sits on top of your brain. Right. And so the homeless person thought gets integrated like this, like a nice little web. It's filed nice, and it's not a big deal. When like dad not giving you ice cream, that makes you mean you're not good enough. It just sits there. And when it sits there, it's not properly filed. So then when anything else comes in your life that remotely helps you relate to that, it hits it. And that's where you get triggered, and you have an sometimes illogical emotional reaction to something, right? Or an illogical fear around something. And so what doing that butterfly or EMDR does is it helps your brain reprocess it. So we go back in real time and we process it in the correct file folder, so that then we can go back to that thought and it's not there anymore. It's no longer there to get triggered. So I think that's really juicy work to do as well. But yeah, I would just say it's good for you to do as much as you can do on your own, but then also know when the next step is to work with someone one-on-one, so that you can have that emotional support if you're working through some deep stuff.
Yeah, so cool how you just explained that. I've never thought about it that way, with the filing and like the block on top of the brain kind of a thing. That really resonates. And I've been actually working with an energy healer over the last 2 years on similar things, like, going through blocks, and understanding like childhood traumas and things like that. And one of the things that I always found really powerful was the positive contemplations that we did at the end of the session. So we would go into these like, maybe more difficult feelings, or the experiences that I had in the past. And then towards the end, in order to reprogram the brain again, he would ask me these positive questions about, just as an example, what is it like to have a healthy and supported relationship with a partner, for example, right? And I found that always really helpful to not just look at all of the negative things and like bring up like the heavy stuff, but then also reprogram it, because it's sometimes really interesting to find out how difficult it is sometimes to answer these kind of simple questions, because you've never maybe were exposed to that kind of stuff, right? Or you haven't really thought about it in that way.
Yeah, what we do at the end of it's a little bit different. I don't ask those questions, but what I do is once we have processed enough, like the processing is kind of magical in the way that what will naturally happen is there will naturally be a turning point. Once we like move through all of the stuff, we kind of get it out, it'll get to a place of neutrality. And once it starts kind of being like, once I feel like it's kind of moved past that processing point, then what I often do is I have my client speak to that version of themselves as themselves today. So I would say, okay, so Julia, can you talk to little Julia and tell her what you think is going on in this ice cream situation? Right. And so then you come in with like your wisdom and your experience and say, your dad really loves you. He didn't mean anything by this. He really just, wants you to do good in life. And, he, of course you're enough. Right. And we go into that positive installation until then at the end, the way I kind of close it off is, so let's say you got through it, and we do this based on like what naturally comes out of the story, right? So let's say you got to the point where you're like, you're butterflying and you're like, oh yeah, like, I am enough, right? And that's where you kind of ended. So then I would say, okay, now let's go back to that original image. Let's bring up the image in your mind and your body. And now let's overlay that with I'm not enough, with I am enough, right? So we check in, we put in, I would check in with both, right? So I check in with, does I am enough feel truthful? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how truthful does it feel? Right. Mm-hmm. And then if, let's say you're saying, oh, it's at a 5, truthful, 5 out of 10. Okay. So then we hold that image, say, I am enough in my head. Right. And process that over, kind of like melding the two together until we get you, between an 8 to a 10, when you access that image, so that now that memory actually triggers the feeling of enoughness. So yeah, I do think closing it on a positive, however, which way you get to it is really important, so that you are not like an open nerve as you go back into your day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to hear if you have an example that you can think of that maybe you went through, because I think it's always easy maybe to talk in theory, right, about the things that are holding us back. And I think, when you explain kind of the first and second process, I was thinking, I think people oftentimes also identify with that fear, right? That's just who they are, right? That's what people say, that they're just like, that's just who I am. And that, so when you feel like that, when you feel like, maybe you can relate, or maybe you have an example that relates to that, but, when you really feel like this is really me, I think sometimes it can seem theoretically simple to go through that process, but the process itself is actually pretty difficult and complex.
Oh yeah. I mean, I did this work and I still do this work. All of this reprogramming on myself for probably 4 years, with a professional. And so I've gone through a lot of memories, a lot of beliefs and stuff. And part of the reason why I started teaching it was because of how much it changed my life. The one that came up immediately when you were asking, one of the things, the core belief was something like, I'm powerless. And it was because there were a couple of things growing up where I really wanted to like go to an event or a class or things like that. And I was like begging my parents to go, and they said it was too much money and they couldn't afford it. And at the time, I kind of internalized that as like, I'm not good enough. They don't believe in me. Like, I'm powerless. Like, I can't even convince them. There were a few other things where I was like, kind of like petitioning to my parents for things, and they held strong. And I took on the belief that, I'm not powerful. And, all the things like that. So that was like a big one for me to work through. And the thing is, I find with a lot of the biggest ones that I worked with were not even necessarily things that I would consciously super identify with. It's not like as I was like walking through my day, I was like, I'm powerless or I'm not good enough, right? Like, that wasn't it. But what was happening was those beliefs about myself were playing out in how I took action. Right? They were playing out in where I was blocking myself in my business, or where I was blocking myself in my love life. And so they were kind of these unconscious patterns that were keeping me small and limiting me. And then sometimes what would happen is, if I had a super emotional moment, then I would have those feelings of, I'm powerless, right? I can't get it right. I would have, like, if I hit a failure, or, I had, something go on. So they would come up in those moments, but it wasn't like, I was self-identifying with that. I think, so I think that was a big thing. I knew something wasn't working, right? And I knew that there was a block there because I wasn't able to show up the way I wanted to, but it really took that deeper inquiry for me to figure out, oh crap, like it's coming from this. And I was shocked when I did that exercise that I was telling you about with, my mentor that I was working with, to see all of the memories that I had backing up that feeling of like feeling powerless and not being able to convince someone of, my beliefs and all, or whatever it was. Right. And then I was like, oh man, that's really rooted in there. No wonder I don't even try anymore. Right. I don't even try anymore because it seemed like such a, a zero-sum game. One of the more toxic things that I think I had was the need to relate to people through commiserating. I had, again, at some point early in life or whatever, I think because I was tall and I was good at sports and I was successful in school and all this stuff, I felt like no one would like me if I didn't like have problems. Right. And it's ironic because I had like tons of problems as a child. I had a lot of things that I was also like dealing with behind the scenes that people didn't know about, but I knew that like people liked me more if I could get on their level. Right. And that was something that became really toxic when I started to become an adult, because I felt like that's how I would make connection. Right. Would be like, oh yeah, I'm struggling with this too, or I'm really struggling with this. How can you help me? And that was how I fostered deeper connection. So of course, then I would get into that thing. And that was something else that I had to, that was something I think that I became a little bit more conscious to me at a certain point. So I was able to reroute that once I saw, wow, this is like not me showing up in the vibration and the frequency of how I really want to be. And it's not what I want to create more of in my life. And I see how it came here. And that was able to be, it was more of like breaking a habit and breaking a pattern. Right.
Yeah. Wow. So interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. I was just thinking it's really that power of working on the unconscious mind, because I can relate to that too, that sometimes you go to sessions, right? You go to train like healings or therapy or maybe even coaching, and you sometimes think, I don't even know what I should talk about, right? And then you go anyway, and things are coming up, and I feel like in that process, you're actually slowly starting to peel the onion to the point where you have that breakthrough. You probably don't have the breakthrough in the first session. Maybe you do sometimes, because maybe you haven't worked at all on you. So, there's more to uncover. But I feel like as you're longer working on these different things, it may take longer to really get to the root of some of the deeper seated, limiting beliefs or fears that we have and that we all hold. It's like there's nobody excluded, right? Everybody experiences that. And it's such a rewarding work. I remember again myself when I would have these sessions where I'm like, I would go out of it and would be like, wow, I can't believe after a year, finally this has come kind of to the light, and now I understand, right? Now I understand why I was holding on to these things, or so it's really powerful work. And I always think it's really not for cowards, that kind of work either, because it's so
I think
not always easy.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy work. It takes being willing to be really honest with yourself, and it takes being willing to be open to change that. Because there are some people that, and you'll go through different things. Like I said, that's why it's important to know like how willing you are, right? Because we've kept these things for so long because we have like a great story around them. We built like a really strong story around them. And so I've seen some of my clients were doing the work, and I can tell if it's not shifting, it's because they still feel like there's some benefit to keeping it. And so it's there's this line from A Course in Miracles that I think is so powerful when it comes to fear clearing work. And it goes, I can only give that which you surrender to me. Right. I can only take away that which you surrender to me. right? And that's how I feel like as a practitioner. I can take away anything that you're willing to surrender, but if you're not willing to surrender, I have no power to take it away, right? And so I think that's a big part of the work. I think that's, you know, something that I've like luckily just been pretty like good at. You know, I'm like, take it all. I don't need any of this bullshit. But it is amazing. I think one of the ways to expedite that process, if someone is like working with a practitioner right now and is like, how do I expedite this process? I don't want it to take a year to like get down to it. The deeper you go into what you desire, if you know what you desire for your life and you honor like what's on your heart to create, even if it seems crazy, right? The more that you allow yourself to go into that, the more rambunctious your fears will be, right? So it's kind of like the more you honor like, wow, I have this soul. I really, you know, when I started doing some of this work, one of the things I always had a business. So I was always like, how do I keep growing the business, right? And then at that time I wasn't married and I wanted to get married. I wanted a partner, and had a bunch of like dating relationships that were not viable. And so the willingness to admit the things that I desired also showed me everything that was in the way of them. Right. And so I think that can help expedite the process if there's a specific, because we can all float on kind of from day to day if we really choose to, but it's when we actually like claim the thing that our heart desires that then we're met with the fears and the beliefs and the blocks and all the things that are in opposition to it. And then that's when like the work gets really juicy.
Yeah. And I have one last question actually, as a practitioner. So if people are listening and maybe they do that kind of work with people, as a practitioner yourself, how do you shield yourself from, do you find that hard? Like to maybe sometimes listen to these like traumas and things that clients bring to you, and how do you maybe clear yourself after these sessions yourself to not bring it with you into your personal life?
I don't have trouble with that. For me personally, I feel like when I'm working with a client, we're in a really safe container, and I feel very much like that person is kind of like in their own little golden egg, and I'm in like my separate golden egg, so to speak, and I'm giving them love and I'm helping the process along, but I'm not in there. Right. So sometimes when I'm doing like energy work, or I'm doing stuff like that, I'll notice like the energy moving in my body, and I'm kind of releasing some stuff for them as well. And that will happen. But it's more of just energy, right? The way I feel it is more energy, and I'm not taking on any of the story because it's not my story to take on. So I have like very strong energetic boundaries around that, as far as like, I don't have any problem taking that on. I do like, you know, sage and clear the energy in my space, so that nothing that because we move a lot of energy when we do that work. Like you're yawning, you're feeling it, you're feeling like, you know, energy move in your body and out of your body. Like it gets intense. So I clear the space so that any energy that needs to dissipate will dissipate with, you know, some Palo Santo or sage or, you know, something like that. But I personally don't have, I'm very clear about like where I end and where they begin. And I think that's something that's really important if you're going to be a practitioner of this work, is being really clear that you're someone that is like assisting a process, but it's not yours. It's not your process.
Yeah. And I love the fact of just being intentional about that. And I love the two golden eggs, and just kind of being side by side instead of being in one together. This is all really interesting. So thank you so much for sharing all of that knowledge. Cassandra, how can people connect with you if they're curious to learn more about your work?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Cassandra Bodzak. I have a YouTube channel, Cassandra Bodzak TV. There's tons of the free meditations and tapping videos like we talked about. And then CassandraBodzak.com is kind of the epicenter for all the things.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again. I think this is super important work, obviously. That's why I thought it was really exciting to have you on the podcast today, because I think oftentimes when, no matter what we're going through, even if it is, burnout, and we are holding on to the belief of, we don't have enough time in the day to get everything done, or we can't, we are just that way. We are just a workaholic and we can't create a better work-life balance. All of these kind of fears or thoughts oftentimes come from somewhere too. And there's something to be said about, we can work through that and don't have to hold on to these kind of things. And I actually loved the thought around commiserating with other people, because I think especially in the corporate space, and where I do a lot of my work with individuals, is that busyness, and that that status symbol of I am super busy and that's why I'm successful kind of a thought process. So yeah,
and that
strongly resonates.
And that's an exact example of one of those like secondary positive gains we were talking about, right?
Mm-hmm,
so it's a negative story to tell that like you're too busy and like it's crazy. I used to tell people, I forgot what it was now because I like reprogrammed it out, but it was something like, I think it was like crazy busy. Whenever anybody asked me, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm crazy busy, And then I was like, is that like something I want to be constantly affirming? No, yeah. But that has a secondary gain, because you're absolutely right. We associate that as like a positive, even though it's like a negative, we associate it as a positive. If I'm really busy, then I must be successful. If I had a client recently that she's a perfectionist, right? And it's literally terrorizing her, right? But she's like, but there's an amount of pride in being a perfectionist, right? And so we have to look at that. And when we can see that like in plain light and be like, okay, I'm associating my busyness as a status symbol. Is there a way to communicate something more positive, right? And so my little trick, I'll just leave you guys with this, because that was one of my things, is instead of saying I'm busy, I would say I have an abundance of exciting projects I'm working on right now. And so the frequency and the energy of that is so much nicer than like, oh my God, I'm so busy, or I'm overwhelmed, or I have like all this stuff. And it doesn't have to be that, but finding your own like positive way of saying, for me, saying I have an abundance of exciting projects, it still gives me that positive affirmation, right? That I'm wanting to communicate, which is fine. You're allowed to communicate. You have a lot going on, but it's putting in a good way. It's saying, yeah, I have an abundance of projects and I'm excited about it. And it's having the energy of like, and guess what? I can hold that gracefully. You don't have to say that like, and I'm holding it gracefully, because that could be weird, but like, that's the energy of it, right? Is that, I am a boss. I always have an abundance of projects on, and I only take the things
that's how I want it to be. Yeah.
And that's how I want it to be. So now you're like, you're not lying. You're not lying about your situation, because if we lie, then our subconscious peeps up and says like, that's not true. Right. And so it's like, okay, we can't do that, but you're saying saying essentially a similar essence, but in a way that actually empowers you and propels what you want to manifest forward.
Yeah, I love that. That's a wonderful way to end the podcast interview today. So thank you so much for sharing that. I noted that right down. Good. Thank you so much again. And for those of you that are listening and who found this podcast episode really helpful, and someone that might benefit from the same information, make sure that you're sharing this podcast with them. We are super, super glad and grateful that you're here. So thank you so much for listening. And I hope to hear you in the next podcast episode.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.